The 2023 Canadian Championship is almost upon us, as starting next week, 14 teams from across Canada will compete to be crowned the champion of Canada and take home the Voyageurs Cup. A record 14 teams in this year's edition of the Canadian Championship, as well, we still have 8 CPL teams with the subtraction of FC Edmonton and the addition of Vancouver FC. We now have League One BC adding a 3rd League One Canada team on top of the champions from League One Ontario and the Premier League du Soccer au Quebec, which is now known as League One Quebec. With the exception of only 2 teams getting a bye to the second round instead of 3 teams due to the addition of League One BC, it is the same format as last year, split into a Western group and an Eastern group with one crossover Eastern team in the Western half of the bracket, and of course, one match ties with the team on top being the home team all the way through to the finals. So let's jump right into it, starting on the western side of the bracket with Pacific FC hosting Cavalry FC. A all CPL matchup in this one, Pacific versus Cavalry, 2 teams who, if you watched my CPL preview, I had right next to each other in the CPL standings at the beginning of my predictions, with Pacific in 5th and Cavalry in 4th. Pacific as the home team, I think, is going to give them a bit of an edge in this match. I think that these 2 teams are incredibly close teams, but I think being at home is what will give Pacific the edge. They're my pick to go through. Next up, we have TSS Rovers, the 1st League One BC champion, versus Winnipeg's Valor FC. TSS Rovers at home should put up a pretty good fight. However, this is going to be their first experience playing against a fully professional side in a competitive match. Valor, while not the best CPL team, is still a Canadian Premier League team. They just have a far more valuable squad and a more experienced squad than the TSS Rovers. Also, given that it's Rovers' first Canadian Championship, Valor gets another edge because of that with experience. Valor's my pick to go through. However, if there was going to be a League One Canada team pulling off an upset in the first round, TSS Rovers is the one with the best chance of doing it. But Valor is still my choice. Next up, we have York United versus Vancouver FC. If Vancouver FC were to win this game, we'd have a great matchup of Vancouver versus the Whitecaps, which is just the Vancouver Whitecaps. That's not confusing at all. But we would have our first ever Vancouver derby if that were to occur. However, York United is hosting this game. This is only going to be the 2nd competitive game in Vancouver FC history. York is a team that I think was greatly improved over the summer. I think York is going to be a solid contender in the CPL this season, whereas I think Vancouver is going to be on the fringe of the playoffs. And adding the fact that York is at home, York just is the favorites in every single aspect of this matchup. So I have York United moving on past Vancouver FC. Next up on the other side, we have CF Montreal versus the Vaughan Azzurri. Vaughan becoming the first ever League One Canada team to face off against an MLS side in this match. That is going to be so exciting for so many reasons. However, I think we can all agree that Vaughan is a little out of their depth here. Yes, Montreal has had a pretty disastrous start to the MLS season, but also like one player on Montreal is worth about the same as Vaughan's whole team on transfer market. Probably more than Vaughan's whole team on transfer market, to be honest. So really, there is no contest here. Vaughan, it's a great experience for them. It's a great opportunity for them to go to Montreal, go play in an MLS stadium. It's a great, just exciting opportunity for a bunch of the guys there, but Montreal is the odds-on favorite they're going through. Next up, we have Halifax versus Ottawa in what is such an interesting match, because this is the game where Halifax was drawn to host, but they were not able to because they don't have access to the Wanderers grounds until the beginning of May, or at least they can't play on Wanderers grounds until the beginning of May. Ottawa then was given the opportunity to host because the selected host team couldn't host, in which they declined, which was weird because they're playing at home on the weekend to start the season. I guess they just didn't want to spend the extra money to host a Canadian Championship match, which means that the hosting duties of this game fell somehow to York, as Halifax and Ottawa are playing the first half of a doubleheader at York Lions Stadium on the Wednesday of the opening round. So neutral site match for this game, which that might be the first time in Canadian Championship history we have that, which is very interesting. Neither team having home field advantage, which really hurts Halifax. Had Halifax had home field advantage this game, I'd say they would have a chance. But very new team, very new system, new coach, all that, with only their second game playing. It's going to take Halifax a little bit to get going to start the season probably. And they're going up against an Atletico Ottawa team that is the favorites to win the Canadian Premier League this season. So Ottawa is, I think, the clear favorite to win this game. Again, had it been in Halifax, the Wanderers would have had a much better chance, but neutral venue on turf, especially where Ottawa is more used to playing as opposed to Halifax, who play their home games on grass, Ottawa is my choice to win. And for the last game of the opening round, we have Forge versus Laval. For the second straight year, Forge in the first round draws the PLSQ team as they played CS Mount Royal Outremont in the first round last year, easily winning that game. I don't see anything different happening in this match. I think Forge, again, at home, odds-on favorite to beat the League One Canada opposition. So Forge, again, for the second straight year, is my pick to beat the Quebec League team. On to the second round. Pacific versus Valor. Two things going for Pacific in this match. First off, they're at home. Second off, I think they are the better team than Valor in the Canadian Premier League. Of course, by the time we get to the second round, we'll be a couple more weeks into the Canadian Premier League season and things will start to be like setting themselves up in the standings. So we'll like know by then really who's better. But Pacific, I think, is going to be in a better spot and is going to be in better form probably by this point in the season. Pacific's my choice to go through. York versus the Whitecaps. York would be hosting, which would be exciting for them. They get their first home match against an MLS side since, I believe, 2019 when they played CF Montreal and what is still their best attended game ever. The Whitecaps, of course, are the defending champions of this tournament. And while the Whitecaps haven't had the greatest start to the MLS season, they are probably the best of the Canadian teams so far. I think they've won the most games, that's for sure. Even though York's hosting, I'm gonna have to give this one to the Whitecaps. Again, I just think the MLS squads, the squad value is just so much higher. The top end players are just, I mean, the designated players in MLS versus CPL players is a huge gap. The Whitecaps are the favorite to move through. However, an upset is entirely possible in this match, but to be safe, I'm picking the Whitecaps. Back to the eastern side of the bracket, we have a Canadian Classique in the second round with Toronto versus Montreal. Now, Toronto would host this game again. Now, last season, of course, Toronto versus Montreal in the semi-final of the Canadian Championship led to a Toronto victory at home, and a pretty dominant Toronto victory at that, despite the fact that Montreal and MLS had been the far better squad that season and Toronto FC was like bottom of the table. That was by far TFC's best game of the season. This season, Montreal has not been good. Toronto FC hasn't either, but Toronto FC has had a better start to the MLS season than Montreal. Add that into the fact that they're at home, and I think Toronto FC continues to be the favorite for this match. I'm going to pick them to go through. The other second round match in the East is Ottawa versus Forge. The East with two warlike matchups in the second round, as Ottawa and Forge was the CPL final last season. Ottawa would host this match like they hosted the CPL final last year, and I think this is just a revenge match for Ottawa, a chance to go and do what they couldn't do back in early November last year and get revenge on Forge for that game. Now, Forge historically has more experience with and has been a better team in the knockout competitions. However, I think Ottawa definitely with the bone to pick with the home field advantage, and just off of the fact that I do have Ottawa being better than Forge in the regular season in the Canadian Premier League this year. I think Ottawa is the favorite to go through, though only slightly. This should be an incredible matchup should we get it. To the semifinals, Pacific versus the Whitecaps, a matchup we've had before, a matchup Pacific has won before. I do think if the Whitecaps are able to get through York on the road, they'll be able to get through Pacific on the road. Maybe a bit more of an intimidating atmosphere going away to Starlight Stadium on the island than it is going to York Lions at York, but I still think that that's not enough to overcome the CPL MLS gap, at least in terms of picking the favorite for a matchup. Again, I'm not saying this means that the Whitecaps are 100% going to win. I'm saying that this means the Whitecaps are the favorite to win. There's an over 50% chance that the Whitecaps are going to win this game, and I always in these predictions go for favorites. So the Whitecaps I have going through past Pacific to a final to try and defend their title. Now, Toronto FC versus Atletico Ottawa Ottawa, this game would be hosted by Toronto FC. Now, Ottawa might be predicted to be the best team in the Canadian Premier League this season, but on the road at Toronto FC, on the road at an MLS team's field, it's going to be a very, very difficult matchup for them. I don't see Ottawa being able to overcome the MLS on the road experience. Add in the fact that by the time we get here, Toronto FC is definitely going to have Insigne back, and hopefully that offense will be running a bit better than it is right now. I do think that Toronto FC should be able to take Ottawa and give us a repeat of last year's final. So that gives us the same final we had last year. Toronto FC versus the Vancouver Whitecaps. We don't know who hosts this game yet. That gets decided later. And for who should win right now, I'm going to say whoever hosts it. Last year, Vancouver at home, that really helped them secure victory in the Canadian Championship final. So if it switches and goes to Toronto FC's home turf, that gives Toronto just a better shot. Again, none of the Canadian MLS teams have been good to start the season. They've all been not great to start the season. However, Toronto FC's defense is far better than last year. They haven't lost yet. And so I think just because of that, Toronto FC is in a position where if Vancouver is going to win this game with the way TFC has been playing, it's going to have to be on penalties, in which case it goes to a 50-50 draw. And TFC has Sean Johnson, a keeper who's won an MLS Cup on penalties in net if that becomes the case. So purely on the fact that TFC has drawn almost every game this season and hasn't been losing, Toronto FC is my favorites to win the Canadian Championship in 2023. So there you have it. That is my predictions for the 2023 Canadian Championship. Well, I still did not feel confident enough to put any CPL teams beating any MLS teams in the predictions. I feel like that is very well within the realm of possibility this season. I think like Forge, Ottawa, York, even Pacific are all very, very good CPL teams, and none of the Canadian MLS teams have been really good. So they're all kind of in positions where an easy upset could occur. However, playing it safe, I still think we're going to get a all MLS final with TFC versus the Whitecaps, with TFC coming out on top. So let me know down below in the comments what you think of these predictions and what your predictions are for the Canadian Championship this season. And as always, if you like this video, hit like. If you want to see more of my stuff, hit subscribe. Follow me on Twitter. Link is down below in the description, and I will see you next time.